The SEC's annual rivalry opponents are set at least for the next 4 years. Most of the top rivalries in the conference are preserved, but there are a few notable omissions. We will get into those rivalry assignments on this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today network. Also, lots of drama unfolding on the field. Massive weekend of games this week, with Alabama at Georgia and LSU at Ole Miss as the headliners. But first, the news that I reported over at USA Today on Monday. The rivalry assignments are set, and this news comes as the SEC is transitioning to a 9-game conference schedule. Now, to review, each SEC team will have 3 rivalry opponents that they will play every year. Their other 6 opponents from on that SEC schedule will come through on a rotating basis. So they will play every team in the conference at a minimum of twice in a 4-year span, once every 2 years, except for those 3 annual rivalry opponents. They'll play those teams every league. This will be every year, excuse me. This will be the schedule for 4 years. And then after a 4-year period, the schedule will reset, and those rivalry opponents will come under evaluation. So, John, just a general overview, as you look at these 3 permanent opponents that are assigned to each team in the conference, who stood out to you maybe as getting the most favorable draw of any team?
Tennessee is really fortunate. It was really fortunate with the interim schedule that we've had the past 2 seasons. I thought it had one of the most accommodating schedules. This year it played 4 teams that were projected to finish at the bottom of the league. And now it gets Kentucky and Vanderbilt as annual opponents.
Alongside Alabama. But yeah.
So alongside Alabama. But you knew it would get Vanderbilt and Alabama. I mean, Alabama and Tennessee is one of the league's more storied rivalries. Vanderbilt, an in-state opponent, so that was obvious. But Kentucky, to me, wasn't a sure thing. I thought Tennessee could get Georgia, Florida, whose rivalry became significant when the league went to divisional play in '92. So there were other possibilities, and I don't think Tennessee could have done better than Kentucky, a program that's won about, 80% of its games against through the years, just as it has Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. I thought Tennessee was the biggest winner, drawing the collection of Alabama, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. I mean, Alabama, sure. That's a tough draw to play every year. You knew that was going to be maintained by the conference. They were not going to get rid of the 3rd Saturday in October. And as you said, they were not going to get rid of an in-state matchup either with Vanderbilt. And so it became who was going to be the 3rd opponent. From Kentucky's perspective, I sort of get it. Like, I think Tennessee is Kentucky's top football rival. I really do. I don't know who the other obvious choice would be. I mean, South Carolina, Florida, those are the other 2 rivals assigned to Kentucky. But I know Tennessee traditionally wins that game, but I still think Tennessee is Kentucky's top rival. But I think Kentucky's on down the list for Tennessee because Tennessee always beats them. There are some more obvious rivals I thought that Tennessee could have been assigned, starting with Florida and Georgia. Or even South Carolina. That game has picked up some steam in the last 10 or 15 years or so. And I just think Tennessee is the only team in the conference that gets to draw Kentucky and Vanderbilt together every year. Now, Vanderbilt is not the doormat they once were, but if you look at things through a historical lens, Kentucky and Vanderbilt are bottom feeders in this conference. So that was a good draw. I thought Florida had a good draw as well. They get Georgia. You knew that. The cocktail party was not going away. That was a staple. And the question was, who would be the other 2 teams Florida would get? Well, as we mentioned, they didn't get assigned Tennessee. Instead, Florida got Kentucky and South Carolina. I thought that was a pretty good draw for Florida. On the other end of the spectrum, teams that I thought got a pretty difficult draw, I look at Arkansas and Texas A&M. Arkansas and Texas A&M each assigned the same 3 teams. They got pegged with the same three rivals. They are Texas and LSU, a couple of whoppers, and Missouri, a team that's been playing really well the last few years. So, I mean, how would you like to be Arkansas? John, they couldn't beat Memphis. Gave that game away on Saturday, and now you get your annual rivalry draw here, and it's like, okay, we're playing LSU, Texas, and Missouri every year, along with 6 other SEC opponents. Good luck.
Yeah, I wonder if its next coach will look at that future schedule. I don't think Sam Pittman will be around to play any of those opponents, but yeah, I think it was a tough draw. I do like Florida's draw. I thought Florida's been playing LSU every year for a long time, and I thought it could have gotten LSU. So I think it came. I think when you look at it, you see if you can only get one of the traditionally top programs, and I guess when I say top programs with that have had success and they seem to have the NIL foundation to have continued success in this era. If you only get one of those, that to me is a favorable schedule. It's hard to ascertain how some of these programs will be. Missouri has had some success recently. South Carolina came on strong last year, not as much so this year. But those are programs I'm not certain about. When you look at, say, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Georgia, those, and I don't include Alabama in that, but I really feel good about those programs' NIL situation. Plus, they have the traditional success that you look at. So you don't want to be playing those teams. If you get 2 of those, that's not a favorable schedule.
I'll throw one more in the mix, John. Well, a couple more. One more that I thought got a difficult draw was Ole Miss. Ole Miss drew LSU, which you knew it would, drew Mississippi State. Of course, they were keeping the Egg Bowl. And the question was, who's going to be that third team? You're keeping LSU, Ole Miss, a long-standing rivalry. You're keeping the Egg Bowl. Who's the third team? The third team is Oklahoma, another big boy. I thought that was a tough draw for Ole Miss, getting LSU and Oklahoma. At the other end of the spectrum, I thought LSU got a pretty favorable draw. LSU's 3-team assignment was Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. Now, Ole Miss has been really good with Lane Kiffin, but what's going to happen to Ole Miss football the day that Lane Kiffin eventually leaves, which I think we both believe someday he probably will leave Ole Miss? Does Ole Miss go back to mediocrity? If it does, I think this is a really good draw for LSU in that they didn't get Alabama. That is the notable omission from this slate of rivalries. There's several rivalry games, kind of secondary rivalry games that were left off, but the real biggie, I thought, no Alabama LSU. Now, that doesn't mean that game won't be played, but instead of being played every year, it will be played twice during these next 4 years. The full schedule will be announced on Tuesday night on the SEC network, and we'll learn what years they're playing. But in the next 4 years, Alabama and LSU will only play 2 times. LSU did not draw Alabama as a permanent rival. I thought that was pretty notable as well. So I thought LSU got off pretty good, and Ole Miss I would add to the teams that kind of took it on the chin there with getting Oklahoma alongside LSU.
Yeah, I mean, I thought LSU could have gotten Alabama, Florida, and Ole Miss.
Yeah.
So it's funny, Texas A&M, LSU used to play Texas A&M long before the Aggies were in the SEC, back when they were in the old Southwest Conference. That was a rivalry that LSU fared very well with, and it recruited in Texas. So, and I even wondered about Texas and LSU.
Oh, I think that would have been a great rivalry. I mean, there's not the history there, but just in terms of geography with those states and what I mean, you're from Louisiana. You tell the story well, John, of sort of like how you looked at Texas growing up in Louisiana. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like Texas kind of felt like Big Brother over there, right?
Yeah.
And they're so great because they're Texas. I mean, I think that's got the makings of a rivalry game. And again, they'll play twice in a 4-year span. but I think that would have been an interesting permanent assignment between Texas and LSU.
Yeah, there actually was way back in 1969 when I was a student at LSU. LSU had a really good team. There was a good chance that it would meet Texas in a bowl game. As it turned out, Notre Dame, LSU lost to Ole Miss, and Archie Manning uh, lost out on that possibility. Notre Dame came in and played Texas with championship on the line. Um, but yeah, that was a big deal because they didn't play, and because of proximity, border state, Texas is always bigger and better than Louisiana. So that was a game. I don't know if Texas cared about playing LSU,
Hmm.
but I think for LSU fans back then, that would have been a really big deal to play Texas. So I thought about that when you're kind of speculating on how this future schedule might go, that I wouldn't have been shocked if the SEC would have paired Texas and LSU.
And there's going to be so much focus, John, on which three teams your favorite school got assigned, and there's going to be a lot of stressing over, oh, well, Team A got an easier draw than Team B, or vice versa. I do think it is important once the full schedules are announced on Tuesday to sort of look at this in their totality, right? Because you're not just playing three conference teams, you're playing 9 conference teams every year, and if you got 3 weaklings assigned as your permanent, well, that means that your other 6 are probably going to be filled with a lot of the big boys, and vice versa. If you got 3 big boys as your permanents, that gives you a better chance of drawing the conference weaklings to round out your 9-game schedule. However, there's no denying that this will interrupt certain rivalries, and I want to put a pin in that, and we'll get to that in a moment. But in general, John, do you think it is worth it for the SEC to do this to their schedule at the expense of giving up some of these rivalries that we're going to get into further, like Alabama, LSU? Because they could have just sort of rinsed and repeated this schedule that they have right now. I mean, even after the conference has gone to 16 teams, got rid of divisions, last 2 years, we've still had Alabama, LSU. We've still had Tennessee, Florida. We've still had some of these rivalry games that are being left on the cutting room floor here. Um, would you have rather seen just sort of a recreation of the schedule that's been in place the last couple of years, or do you think it's worth it to add that 9th conference game, go to this 3+6 system, even if it means losing some of those rivalry games on an annual basis, like Alabama, LSU?
Yeah, I've got where I can accept losing rivalry games.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it not just in the SEC, but some of the best rivalries of all times. And rivalries can change from one time period to another. But I go back to that outside the SEC, the old Nebraska-Oklahoma series. I love that game, usually around Thanksgiving. So, no, I think it's better. It's best to go this way. One of the things I really noticed during this interim schedule, when you go to 16 teams, there's a chance for tremendous scheduling disparity. I keep referring to Oklahoma to prove my point because a couple of weeks ago, all 8 Oklahoma SEC opponents were ranked in the top 25 in one of the 2 polls. Just a brutal schedule, but there's a real variance with that big a schedule. So I think by rotating, coming in with a 6-team rotation, I think that's fair situation for everybody. And I like the idea of schools getting to see teams more often.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that divisional setup, even with fewer teams in a 14-team league, and you could go forever uh, without seeing some of
Oh
these
yeah,
teams,
you could
or
never
make
see
them.
them. Wasn't it
Yeah,
famously that Texas A&M and Georgia never played throughout the entire span of the conference being a 14-team league? I don't think those teams ever played while it was a 14-team conference.
yeah, it's almost like, well, you don't even think, are they in the conference? I mean, it's just the idea. the SEC really had, we talk about rivalry games, but the SEC has had a lot of good rivalries through the years when it was a smaller conference in particular. I think fans from the various schools had a working knowledge of what the rest of the SEC looked like. They'd probably made a road trip to Starkville or Auburn or Alabama. Uh, and that created a sense of familiarity, and I think it made those games more meaningful. So I like the idea. It's hard to tell individual wise, but I think about when great players were in this league, and some fans never got to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, with the greatest players like a Herschel Walker or a Tim Tebow, those kind of guys, Johnny Manziel, you never got to see them because of the schedule. The rotational thing, unless somebody transfers, you have a better shot at seeing these guys.
All right, so I've got 6 rivalry games pinpointed, John, that were not preserved in this assignment. And again, I want to stress these games will still happen twice in a 4-year period, but that leaves 2 years in these next 4 years in which these games won't be played. So I've got 6 games earmarked here, and I want you to tell me, is it a big deal, kind of a moderate deal, or not a big deal at all that these games are left off the docket? Now, this is with the caveat that you've already said, you think any rivalry is worthy of being sacrificed for the right reasons. You're okay with, some rivalries not being played every year. But with that in mind, we're going to sort of look at this at a grading scale here. How big of a deal is it from big deal on down to not a big deal? So let's start, John, with one on my list here, Georgia, Tennessee. There was a couple rivalry games that we mentioned were not maintained for Tennessee. How big of a deal is it that Georgia and Tennessee will not be played on an annual basis? Big deal, moderate deal, not really a big deal.
Well, I think that's a big deal. Bordering states recruit some of the same players. Tennessee has a strong presence in Atlanta, a really large alumni chapter. There's only 250 miles between the two towns, Athens and Knoxville, and that rivalry has produced so many good games. Right now, Georgia has the upper hand, but it hasn't always had the upper hand. Part of it may be personal in that I always like going to games in Athens, cover games at Sanford Stadium. I like the setting there, but I just think that's proximity. It just that's a rivalry I will really miss. Even though when they went to divisional play, at first Tennessee Florida was a bigger deal than Tennessee Georgia because those two teams were at the very top of the division in the 1990s, and it was Steve Spurrier versus Philip Fulmer, a great rivalry. But I just like to, again, it's a bordering state, and that's a game I'll really miss.
I might surprise you with this one, John. I'm going to say this one's not a big deal.
Okay.
This one, it's a good game in a lot of years. It was a great game this year, overtime game. But and I'll save my bigger thoughts for a little bit later. I think losing Florida, Tennessee is a bigger deal. I think for Georgia, they kept their rivalry games with Florida and with Auburn. And Georgia plays Georgia Tech every year as well. I don't know. This one feels like a good matchup, but I don't know that I ever felt like this was a real heated rivalry where like the two sides hated each other. And maybe that's just because the last, 8 years in a row now, Georgia has won this game. Kirby Smart has owned this rivalry in the way that Nick Saban once owned Tennessee. Actually, I believe it's 9 years in a row now.
9 years,
Yeah,
yes.
9 years in a row that Georgia's won. And if you go back even a little bit further, you go from like 2010 on, Georgia has owned this series, and it is still a good series, even though it's been one-sided lately. But I just think I don't get the hatred in this rivalry, the heated emotions that I get in some others that were left off the list here. So I'm going to call this one not a big deal. Got any objection to that?
Yeah, well, it just tells me once again, it reminds me that you're just not Southern enough, Blake.
Maybe not.
Okay.
Maybe not. All right, moving on to the next one, John. Texas A&M. They could have gone any number of ways with Texas A&M's rivals, and one that was left off the list was Texas A&M Arkansas, a game that has roots back to the Southwest Conference. But then after Arkansas left for the SEC, this game was on hiatus for a while, and then it renewed in the 2000s, and of course Texas A&M then joined the conference, and the rivalry was on annually. But now this is one left off the list that will be in that bracket of played twice in a 4-year span rather than every year. Texas A&M and Arkansas, a game that's sometimes played at a neutral site. Big deal, moderate deal, not a big deal that we're not keeping Texas A&M Arkansas on an annual basis.
Well, I grew up following the Southwest Conference, so I can remember that rivalry. However, I don't think it's a big deal. Not a big deal at all, really, because Arkansas, when it was Southwest Conference, its biggest rival was Texas. A&M wanted to
Mm-hmm.
beat Texas more than anybody, so uh, that to me is it's just not that big a deal. I think Arkansas's got a rivalry with Missouri. You could say it's
With
so I just don't
LSU.
have a yeah with LSU. I just don't think that of that as a big deal.
I agree with you. I think this one's not a big deal. I think getting Texas back as an annual rival for Arkansas, I agree with you. I think that's a bigger deal to Arkansas fans than playing Texas A&M every year. I mean, Texas A&M's a rival. Texas is a hated opponent. I mean, that
Yeah,
goes beyond rivalry. They hate them. So it was a bigger deal to get Texas back on the annual docket for Arkansas than, and I think giving up Texas A&M. I think this is fine. Playing this game once or twice every 4 years, I think that's appropriate. It's not a game that has to happen every year. Another one for Arkansas, John. Arkansas is one of the many teams that their rivals could go in a number of different ways, and what the conference landed on was LSU, Missouri, and Texas. Those three games were preserved. So Texas A&M was not preserved, and another one was Ole Miss. We've seen some classics between Arkansas and Ole Miss in the last several years. John, big deal, moderate deal, or do you also see this one as not a big deal that Arkansas and Ole Miss will not play every year?
not a big deal. I mean, we have had some great games in that rivalry. However, a long-standing no. I think with Arkansas came into the league in 1992. So when I think of big rivalries, I just go further back than that. And yes, they did play some great games through the years. So you just can't maintain rivalries to me of that level. So I don't have a problem with that.
I'm in agreement with you on this one. Both these Arkansas rivalries that are moving to twice every 4 years with Texas A&M and Arkansas, I think that's fine. And something had to give, right? You only get to keep three. Arkansas kept Texas, LSU, and Missouri. I think that's very appropriate for Arkansas. I think that's a fine assignment, and I don't think losing these games are a big deal. A few more, John. How about Florida, LSU, a game that divisions really spawned this rivalry in its most heated form. And this is one where I think if you ask players, the players on these two teams tend to really dislike each other. You know, I mean, some games are a bigger deal to the fans, other games are a huge deal to the players. And I think for the fans, this is a big rivalry game, Florida LSU. But I think with the players, I mean, you've been part of the comments over the years, interviewed these players like Florida. Florida and LSU, the guys on those two teams just seem to never like each other. But how big of a deal is it? We've had some great games in this series, by the way, too. The infamous shoe toss game just a few years
Yeah,
ago in the
yeah.
fog at the swamp. That was the beginning of the end for Dan Mullen. And then, of course, the hurricane controversy game. Where was that game going to be played? The bickering between the athletics directors at Florida and LSU at the time. So, how big of a deal is it that there's no Florida LSU on an annual basis.
Yeah, I think it's a moderate big deal, not a big one, but a rivalry you'll miss. You pointed out some of the things, and I don't know why a series evolves this way, but it just happens. Uh, LSU and Florida aren't bordering state; they're not in bordering states, but they have had a lot of big games, and there have been incidents which contribute to that. Remember the Tim Tebow cell phone deal, and I remember Steve Spurrier when he was trying to get a head coaching gig, and he got did LSU interviewed him, but said no, I think we'll go in a different direction. And Steve Spurrier reminded LSU of that a few years later at Florida when he beat the Tigers 59-3 on a Saturday night game.
One of
I think
several years in a row that Florida
yeah,
beat
it was
LSU. They dominated that rivalry in the 90s there with Spurrier.
yeah, it was in Tiger Stadium, I think. I just remember watching on TV and seeing Florida receivers in the old fun and gun offense, seeing Florida receivers making a catch, and there was no LSU defender in the picture. The guy was just running unimpeded through the secondary. So yeah, I just think there've been a lot of good games in that, and even this year,
Mm-hmm.
uh, when they played earlier, you could tell they don't like each other.
They really don't. They really don't. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why
Yeah,
certain games needle players more than others. And I'm not saying the fans love each other, but they're Florida fans. I think despise other teams more, even more than they despise LSU. But for the players, I don't know. LSU might be in the top of the list. Same for LSU. There's been a lot of years where Florida is just that circled game on the schedule. And this one goes back a long time. I think of it, really in the divisional days where it gained steam, but it was played even before that. But, both these teams during the division era were generally pretty good. There were some, top 15 showdowns year after year after year. So I agree with you. This one's a moderate deal. I don't think it's the biggest deal, but I think this one is a moderate deal. I got a couple more I want to ask you about, John. How about Florida, Tennessee? In the 90s, this was a defining game. Played in September, would usually indicate who the front runner was going to be to win the East. And a lot of those years, whoever won the East won the conference. Top 10 clashes. Big deal, moderate deal, not a big deal to lose Florida, Tennessee.
well, as I pointed out, you can only maintain so many rivalries. So, nonetheless, I mean, I'm not criticizing the end of this rivalry, the decision not to continue it every year, but yeah, that to me that's a big deal because it was such a big deal when the SEC went to divisional play. Of course, now they've done away with it, but when they did that, that was such a big deal, and it created the SEC championship game, which was a big deal. But you go back and look at those in the 90s, and it was Tennessee and Florida. It was Steve Spurrier versus Philip Fulmer. It was Peyton Manning um, versus Danny Werfel. They had some amazing games with each other. That to me is a big deal. And I will say, I remember, I guess this was about 1997 in Gainesville, being in the press box, and it's an open air
Mm-hmm.
press box, as you know. And this was an hour before the game, and there was a roar in the crowd, so much so that it was hard to talk to the person next to you. It was that loud. I've never I've never observed a stadium that loud that long before a game. Now, it might have been just as loud at Neyland Stadium, but that's glassed in, so you don't get the full effect of the crowd. But gosh, that was Peyton Manning's senior year. and they were
Yeah.
playing in Florida, and Florida was the defending national champion. It was just, I just will never forget that. Of all the crowds I've witnessed, and all the big game crowds, and all the noise that can accompany an SEC game, I just had never experienced anything before or since before the game where it was that loud for that long.
And Florida won that game, right? Peyton Manning never beat Florida in his career, did he?
Never be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, John. This one's a big deal, and I think I'm showing my age a little bit. Of course, you said it was a big deal as well, but I think for millennials in particular, so I'm talking about people in their 30s and their 40s, roughly. I don't have the textbook definition of millennials in front of me, but I'm in my late 30s. I'm kind of right in the middle of that millennial age bracket. This game was huge for millennial college football fans. Like this is as we were kind of coming of age as college football fans. I was born in 87, but you don't have memories your first few years. My memories of college football start forming in the 90s, and this was the game. At least it was the game during the first month of the season, and it had long-standing ramifications. And you hit it, John. I mean, Steve Spurrier versus Philip Fulmer. I mean, two very successful coaches, vastly different personalities. Danny Warfel versus Peyton Manning, two awesome stadiums. And even though the rivalry has waned a little bit since its peak in the 90s and early 2000s, I still think this is a great game. You and I have both covered this game when both teams are mediocre. And you wouldn't know both teams are mediocre by the environment in the stadium. I mean, these Tennessee fans, it's like I was saying earlier about the players between LSU and Florida. Tennessee fans, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think Tennessee fans despise Florida maybe even more than they despise Alabama. Like on some level, I think there might be some respect for Alabama. They don't like them, but they might quietly admit they respect them. Some would, not all, some. But I don't think there's any love, any respect, nothing for Florida from Tennessee's side of things. And I know for Florida, they have bigger rivals, but hey, we've been in the swamp, like you were saying, when Tennessee comes to town, and that place is rocking and roaring. And so, again, for me, how big this game was in the 90s probably weighs into me saying this, but even when this game is not as its heyday, it is a darn good rivalry game that has served up some dandies and just some great environments. So I say this is a big deal that they're not keeping Tennessee and Florida. On top of that, because it was right there for the taking. The SEC really could have kept this one. They could have kept Tennessee, Florida. Others, it's like there's only 3 spots for 5 rivalries. Something's got to go. In this case, yeah, Florida could have swapped in for Kentucky on Tennessee's assignment, and Tennessee could have swapped in for South Carolina on Florida's roll call.
Yeah, I think coaches contributed to this rivalry, and that a little of that even predated divisional play. Doug Dickey was the coach at Tennessee, and he left for the Florida job. Then he came back to Tennessee as the AD. So that was a factor, but mostly it was Steve Spurrier, uh, a native Tennessean, East Tennessean. Didn't go to Tennessee because it was running the single wing offense under, back then. So that didn't fit what he did. He was a passing quarterback. So that added so much to the rivalry. And I've never enjoyed or looked forward more to interviewing coaches and players than I did when I was in Gainesville to interview Florida's, because the players picked up on, how players emulate coaches. They read the room. They know what this
Yeah.
coach is about. So the players, the players picked up on how Spurrier acted and how he would needle Tennessee. If they did that, I'd never experienced anything like that. In during the week, I would go down and stay the week and file columns from Gainesville.
I'm sure
And
you hated that, John, spending the week in Florida. I know how you like those warm climates, and
yeah,
I'm sure you made a few trips over to the beach, when you weren't working down there on the company dime. I'm sure you just hated making that trip every year.
yeah, 73 miles to Crescent Beach,
Uh-huh. Oh,
Gainesville.
okay. Yeah, yeah. So you did
Yeah,
make a
and
few trips.
it was a tough. there was personal stuff. I fell going down some steps leading into the interview room for an
How
Urban
much
Meyer
did you
press
settle that
conference once.
lawsuit for, John?
Florida was so gracious toward me. Really. I mean, the trainer came in, he gave me crutches. They got me an appointment immediately that afternoon with an
Wow.
orthopedic specialist in Gainesville because yeah, the hall there where you're going down some concrete steps, there were only a few steps, and I just didn't see the last one, and I had a bad knee anyway, but yeah, there was legal possibilities there. And then there was my wife, who is a Tennessee fan and native Tennessean, loved Tim Tebow. And so she went to games when Tennessee played Florida. She would wear to Neyland Stadium. She would wear a Tennessee jersey, but underneath it was a Tim Tebow jersey.
There were
And when
probably a
she
lot of
was in
those
this,
people during that time. They had their own team, but then they were Tim Tebow fans on the side.
yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we both agree this one is a big deal. This is the first one we're unanimous on that it's a big deal. And I've saved maybe the most interesting one for last, John. Alabama-LSU. Not an annual game. Goes to twice in the next 4 years. Big deal, moderate deal, not a big deal.
Well, you have to go way back to the late 50s when LSU and Ole Miss rivalry, late 50s, early 60s, was at its pinnacle. But Ole Miss faded thereafter. Bear Bryant.
Alabama-LSU, John.
Yeah, I know, but I'm
Oh,
getting
okay.
that. I'm just
Oh, okay.
because fans switched. That Ole Miss
Oh, okay.
LSU was such a big deal, and it remained a big deal. But Alabama was a bigger deal because Bear Bryant, Johnny Vaught left Ole Miss. Bear Bryant in the late 50s comes to Alabama from Texas A&M and turns it into a national power. Then you have Nick Saban revives LSU football, wins a national championship, goes to the pros, and then comes back to the SEC to Alabama. I mean, LSU fans, a lot of them never forgave him for that. It wasn't as though he went from LSU to Alabama. There was an NFL stop in between. But yeah, that game meant so much. And I go back in the Bryan era when Charlie McClendon was the LSU coach. He was a former coach under Bear Bryant, an assistant coach on Bryant's staff. Bryant's record against assistants was kind of like Nick Saban's record against assistants. He taught them just enough, but not too much.
How big of a deal is it that this one won't be played annually?
I just think it's a huge deal. That's maybe because again, divisional play, it was a big deal before divisional play. And there were times when that game was kind of like what Florida and Tennessee became, where the winner is the clear-cut favorite. But there were some really good LSU teams that couldn't beat Alabama under Bryant and then under Saban. And also, you go back 2019, LSU's unbeaten national championship team was as good a team I think that's ever been in the SEC. And then a year later, 2020, Alabama fields a team that's in the same class that to me ranks with the best teams ever in this conference. And so that's kind of how it was. Alabama or LSU, which one's going to be better? So I think that's a huge deal.
I agree. We're in agreement on this one too. Huge deal. This game, not only was it rivalry stakes, not only was it division stakes. I mean, when you only had two teams in the national championship and there was no playoff, this game determined who's going to the national championship. Now, there was the one year, of course, where they met again in the national championship after playing in the regular season. But for the most part, it was sort of an elimination game. Who's still in the hunt? and who's not, or if one of the two teams weren't in the hunt, maybe a ranked team, but they weren't in the hunt, could they play spoiler for the other side? And so Alabama had a long streak of success there during the Saban days, but then LSU got the one in 2019, the Joe Burrow year, one in 2010 and 2011, in those games as well, before Alabama flipped the script in the national championship game. So yeah, I mean, we had divisions for 30 years, John, and I know you go way back before divisions, but it's not like divisions were just here for 5 years and then gone. Divisions, we had them for so long, 30 years, and then so these great rivalries emerge that aren't just, they may have existed before, but they take on bigger meaning when they help influence who's going to the conference championship game. Games like Florida and Tennessee, games like Alabama and LSU. And now divisions have gone away, but you can't take away the feelings that were formed and the games that occurred during that time. And so, yeah, I mean, Alabama LSU for, I'd say, easily the last 20 years, John, has been one of the biggest annual games, not just in the SEC, but in all of college football for probably 20 years running. And now it's going to be played twice every 4 years instead of annually. Yeah, I think that to me, this one and losing Florida, Tennessee are the two biggest deals.
Yeah, and really kind of for the same reason. They were a product of divisional play. And divisional play now seems outdated, not just because you're going away from division, because the conference championship game just doesn't have the same impact it once did. It used to be any good team going into season, the season goal was to get to Atlanta. At first to get to Birmingham, and then it became get to Atlanta, because that signifies a successful season, and that's lost now. But yeah, I really miss that. Those two, Tennessee and Florida, LSU and Alabama, for a
Those are
long
if you could
yeah,
only save two, those are the two you'd save.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the two I'd save as well. Well, some rivalry games this week. One I'll be covering, John. LSU travels to Ole Miss. Another key game. Alabama goes to Georgia, and how large does that loss to Florida State loom with now a road trip to Georgia? Let's touch on Ole Miss LSU first. What do you trust more in this game? Ole Miss's offense, which has been flying high with their former Division II quarterback, now SEC star Trinidad Shambliss. Do you trust Ole Miss's offense more or LSU's ironclad defense more in a matchup between two coaches that neither one has the best track record in these big game situations?
I guess I'm leaning toward LSU's defense. As good as Ole Miss's offense has been, I've seen it at times under Lane Kiffin when that offense is really rolling, encounter a really good defense and not perform as well. Uh, LSU's defense is so much better than what it has been under Brian Kelly. I just think it's. I think it will take this game as a challenge. I think it has a potential season long to be a dominant defense, and I think it will take Ole Miss offense as a challenge. But Ole Miss's quarterback Trinidad Shambliss, never even heard of the guy, and I still hadn't heard of him
And
2
now he's a
weeks
star.
ago. Now we've got two quarterbacks, well, more than two, really. You look around the league, and all these quarterbacks have come out of nowhere. Joey Aguilar, the transfer from UCLA, who never played at UCLA, now at Tennessee. Bo Prabula from a Penn State backup to a star with Missouri. So there's a lot of that going around. But yeah, I think this will be a great game. But I kind of like LSU's offense. To me, is better than what it's shown in significant games.
I think we'll learn a lot in this game. I think we'll learn how serious of a national title contender is LSU? Because that week one win at Clemson looked great at the time, and now the wheels have fallen off of Clemson. Dabo Sweeney's taking a hammer to him at, at Clemson, and so I mean, still a good win, but it kind of makes you reflect on things considering what has happened to Clemson since then. So this is sort of a prove it game to me for LSU. Are you a national championship contender or are you not? And for Ole Miss, I think this is, are you a playoff contender or not? Ole Miss's schedule is pretty favorable. John, you look at who's left after this. They've got road games at Georgia and Oklahoma. Neither one of those are going to be easy. But Ole Miss will be favored in every other game on the schedule. So if they can get one here against LSU, they could lose both those games. They could lose at Georgia, at Oklahoma, scramble to 10-2, and be in the playoff. But I think this one's huge for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss because if you lose this one, that means you've either got to beat Georgia on the road or beat Oklahoma on the road. I know LSU is an extremely difficult assignment, but I think their best chance is being at home in this game rather than having to beat Georgia on the road or Oklahoma on the road.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only reason that makes me maybe doubt that would be Oklahoma's schedule is so tough.
True. Yeah.
And I don't know how beaten down it might be or how depth depleted it might be by the time it plays Ole Miss. Hard to say, but yeah, this is a great opportunity for Ole Miss. And you're right. When you get past this game, of course, you have to go back to last year. Ole Miss couldn't beat Kentucky at home. And so you can't say, well, that's a sure win or this is a sure win. But the schedule certainly looks favorable if it could come out of the LSU game with a win.
What do you make of this Auburn-Georgia matchup, John? I think it's bigger for, or excuse me, Alabama-Georgia. I think it's bigger for Alabama than Georgia. Georgia's got a little more room to play with in the fact that they haven't lost a game yet. Now, there's still some landmines on Georgia's schedule. We mentioned the game against Ole Miss. Georgia Tech looking like no chump lurking at the end of the schedule, gave Georgia all they could handle last season. Auburn is on the plains this year. Texas is coming to Sanford Stadium later. So, I mean, Georgia will be a little bit behind the eight ball if they lose to Alabama, but Alabama is really going to be up against it if they lose this one because remaining on Alabama's schedule are Vanderbilt, Missouri, Tennessee, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, all ranked teams that I just rattled off. That's 6 ranked opponents left after this one. So I would call this an important game for Georgia. For Alabama, I would call this a must-win game in an incredibly difficult venue playing Kirby Smart on the road.
Yeah, I kind of almost chuckled when you were outlining how difficult the schedule is, and you're including Vanderbilt. But no, that's reality.
That's reality.
It's not how it used to be, but it's reality right now. Vanderbilt just scored 70 points on Georgia State. What's going on? You're right. And you know how it goes with Alabama. The fans expect so much. So having already lost to Florida State, that would be a huge problem for Kalen DeBoer going forward. I really kind of think sometimes I look at things from perspective of what would the SEC prefer. And these are two programs that at one time or another have been the program in the conference. But I think this is a year where the SEC should say, well, we kind of need to sacrifice Alabama because Alabama lost a game decisively to Florida State. And that's going to hang with it. So I think the SEC is better off if Georgia wins out, and best of luck to Alabama.
And this is why Kalen DeBoer could not lose that opener at Florida State. And I know at Florida State may well end up being a top 10 team. It's given no evidence to the contrary so far. But you can't lose that game when you have all that's left on their schedule. And I've said before, John, I actually think Alabama, we don't know how the next couple months are going to shake out, but I think Alabama could be a playoff contender at 9-3 because they have a really, really tough strength of schedule. And that might be able to prop them up even at 9-3. But I don't know if they can get to 9-3 if they lose this game when you have 6 ranked opponents left after this one. So this is like I said, this is why you can't lose to Florida State in the opener, and this is why teams schedule cupcake games in their season openers. I mean, Alabama had Wisconsin on the schedule too, and while I think it's admirable, and we've encouraged teams to play tough schedules, this is sort of the backfire potential when you get stomped by Florida State, and you think, boy, could have played the Sisters of the Poor in week 1 instead of Florida State, and this game look a little bit different.
Well, you look at Alabama. If you looked at Alabama's schedule in preseason, you see Georgia on September 27th, Tennessee October 18th. But in between, you got Vanderbilt, Missouri, and you think those are, you count those in the win column.
Right.
I'm not saying there will be breezes, but you count them. But now you look at that schedule: Georgia, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Tennessee, 4 consecutive games, no open dates, all against nationally ranked opponents. Vanderbilt should win again this week. Missouri's is going to win again this week. We'll have 2 weeks to get ready for Alabama. And then you come around to Tennessee. So, yeah, what didn't seem like a particularly rigorous stretch in preseason now looks very ominous for Alabama.
You mentioned Missouri, John. We got to get to our picks in a moment, but I'm struck by this stat. In Missouri's last 30 games under Eli Drinkwitz, they are 25-5. There's a lot of buzz around the possibility of Lane Kiffin to Florida, John, but isn't Eli Drinkwitz just sort of Lane Kiffin with a worse haircut and cornier jokes? I mean, guys won a lot of football games last 2.5 years. It's interesting. I mean, I know I get Kiffin being atop the list, the wish list for Florida, for a lot of Florida fans, even though that job's not open yet. We both believe it's going to come open in a matter of weeks. But if Kiffin's not the guy, got another guy in this conference at Missouri, 25-5 in his last 30 games. It's worth a look, at least, isn't it?
I know. Drinkwitz doesn't have the long-standing track record that Kiffin does. But, yeah, this is not what I thought Missouri would become under Eli Drinkwitz. And we talked about this before, but it's so noticeable now when it plays at Fairwell Field that it has a home field advantage now. And when it first came into the SEC, I didn't think it had a home field advantage. Crowd was very docile, and it was just not a typical SEC venue. Now it's very much so. So, yeah, look at Missouri's schedule. It's a real playoff contender.
John, I was at a wedding in Kansas City last week. Several friends there. One of my friends who's a Missouri fan said if Missouri beats Alabama, they would be 6-0 at the time. Said if Missouri beats Alabama, they're going to the playoff. And he wanted to come on here in the pod and make that prediction. I didn't invite him to come on the pod this week. I didn't know if that would be okay with you. But Missouri does get to 6-0, beat Alabama. Got to beat Alabama to get to that point. But it's a home game. Alabama could be reeling. Prediction might have some legs to it.
Yeah, Missouri still has some tough games after that. I mean, Auburn the following week at Auburn, now Vanderbilt and Nashville, A&M, Oklahoma. So it's no sure thing, but pretty good shot if it beats Alabama.
All right, we'll put a pin in that one, John. Get to our picks. I am 11-9 for the season, 2-3 last week. You were 10-10, back to the 500 mark for the season. You had a winning record at 3-2 last week. Let's get to it. A 5-pack of picks. As a reminder, we're picking 4 SEC games. We can pick any 4 games we want against the spread, and we will also have a lock of the week. So here are my 4 picks, John. You've been going first the last couple weeks. I'll go first. I'm just going to run right through all 4 of them here. From the SEC, I'm taking Arkansas and 6.5 points. Why in the world am I taking Arkansas after they blew it against Memphis last week? And they're hosting Notre Dame. Well, Notre Dame hasn't looked all that great to me, and Arkansas has a way of losing close games. So give me 6.5 points. I'll take the home team and say Arkansas can lose another close one. I'm also going against the grain on Vanderbilt. They're a 21.5-point favorite against Utah State. I'm going to take those 21.5 points and say Vanderbilt can't score 70 points 2 weeks in a row. Texas A&M, they are hosting Auburn this week. Huge game for both, particularly for Texas A&M's playoff chances. I'm taking Texas A&M to cover the 6.5-point spread at home. I'm also taking Georgia in that showdown with Alabama. Georgia, a 2.5-point favorite. I'm taking Georgia to cover the 2.5-point spread. My lock of the week, John, the aforementioned Florida State is a 6.5-point road favorite at Virginia. I've never known the Virginia to be that difficult on the road team, so I'm taking Florida State, giving the points. The Seminoles will cover the 6.5-point spread.
Okay. I guess I'll go. I'll lead off. I'll take LSU. What is the line you have on the LSU game?
Ole Miss is a 2.5-point home favorite.
Yeah, I like LSU to win that game. So
you're taking LSU and the 2.5 points in your pocket.
Yes, and I will take Tennessee. Is it -10?
No, the line I got is pretty favorable for you, John. There, the line I'm using -7.5 at Mississippi State. Upstart Mississippi State, we should mention 4-0. Give them some flowers. 57 minutes deep into the podcast, for what that's worth.
Not much, but 7. Geez, I love that line.
You're liking it even more.
I don't see Mississippi State holding Tennessee under 40 points. So.
Those Cowbells getting a lot of respect by the odds makers.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll get. Gosh, I feel really good about those first 2 picks, which means they're both wrong.
Oh, total bust. No doubt about it.
No question. Then I'll go against you in a head-to-head matchup. I will take Auburn and the points.
You're taking the 6.5 points for
Yes.
Auburn. Boy, Auburn gives up the backdoor cover to Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah.
Oklahoma had to cover the 6.5-point spread, get the safety to get the backdoor cover and a 7-point victory. Just another Auburn game where they were so close but couldn't pull it out. And I know there were some questionable calls, might be putting it politely. There were some botched calls in that game, but it's just another familiar story for Auburn, John. They find ways to lose, and the refs had something to do with it. But Auburn had 13 penalties, gave up 9 sacks. Sort of a familiar tale, I thought, for Auburn and squandering that opportunity against Oklahoma. But you'll take those 6.5 points, huh?
Yeah, I wonder if officials, SEC officials, look at Auburn that way, and if it's a close call, just go against Auburn and thinking, well, it's no big deal. They'll find a way to lose anyway. So
might as well help them out.
Might as well. Yeah, we might as well contribute. Then I've got, I agree with you on Georgia versus Alabama. I'll give the points there.
You're giving the 2.5 points. Got it.
Yes.
I've seen that line at 3.5 at other places. I got it marked here at 2.5. I like that a little better. Gives us some room to cover the spread if Georgia wins by a field goal.
Yeah. I like the 2.5 because I was looking at 3.5 too. And I would still take. Would you still take Georgia at 3.5, or would you back off?
I think I probably still, if I was forced to pick that game, I'd still take them at 3.5. I might have picked a different game though if it was 3.5. But when I saw that line at 2.5, I really liked it more. Who's your lock this week, John?
Well, I'm off that Kent State bandwagon.
I know that's dead and gone.
I found a new version First of all, kudos to Michigan for winning at Nebraska last week for me. I appreciate it.
Yes, you got your lock. I didn't. That was the difference in our records last week.
Yeah, give a shout out to the Wolverines and their interim coach. Um, I like. I found a new Kent State.
Mm.
It's a more high profile Kent State.
Is that Stanford? Oregon State? Where are we going
UCLA.
Here? UCLA. Oh, how could I forget UCLA and your man, Nico Iamaleava.
I tell you
Kiss
what.
kitty.
No. New Mexico. New Mexico. While I was watching New Mexico just hammer UCLA, UCLA had last week off. This is the previous week. And I'd seen the other UCLA games. I said, this is without a doubt the worst Power 4 team in the country.
Now they're playing Northwestern, John. Northwestern, a 6.5-point favorite there in that little soccer stadium or whatever it is they're playing in Evanston.
UCLA
you don't want to
players,
go on the road to Northwestern, though, do you?
Listen, UCLA players, the competent ones, are thinking, where am I going to play next? Guarantee you Nico's family's putting out some feelers. He's
probably
not
putting out some feelers to Texas Tech and that billionaire booster, Cody Campbell, down there saying, how bad do you want us? And Cody Campbell, you don't become a billionaire by making bad investments, I don't think so. Probably not very badly.
He wouldn't get a return phone call from Cody Campbell. No, thank you. So, yeah, I will give those points gladly. Northwestern usually can run the ball a little bit. I haven't watched it this season, but I watched New Mexico line up and just ram the ball down UCLA's throat, running between the tackles, play after play. And so I'll go with the Northwestern bunch.
The Northwestern bunch. That sounds like a documentary or something.
It's a protest group on campus.
Yes. They'll probably make a documentary of the Alabama-LSU rivalry, but it won't be on the annual docket in the next 4 years for the SEC. Thanks for stopping by and listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered. As a reminder, we'd appreciate it if you give us a rating or review or hit that subscribe button. New episodes each and every week. Enjoy the games this weekend. We'll be back with you next week.